This is the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro. Since its release a few months ago, it's become one of the most popular handheld emulation devices on the market thanks to its impressive specs, decent sized screen, and great build quality. But does it live up to all of the hype, and is it worth buying over other similar devices? Well, let's take a look. Before we dive in, I want to take a moment to announce that the second book in the Handheld History series will start shipping in June and is now available to pre-order. It's called A Handheld History 88 to 95, and this one is a deep dive on portable systems released between the years 1988 to 1995. A link to pre-order will be in the description below. The Retroid Pocket 4 currently comes in two flavours, the standard Pocket 4 and the Pocket 4 Pro, with both of these models featuring several different variant shell designs. Our review unit provided by Retroid is the Pro version, so this is the version we'll be focusing on in this video. But for those of you that are interested, the primary difference with the standard Pocket 4 is that it's slightly less powerful in almost every area. The CPU and GPU are downgraded slightly, and even the provided OS is an older version. The standard Pocket 4 costs $149, while the Pro model is $199. So that's a $50 difference between the two versions. So whether you want a boost in performance by spending a little bit extra is up to you. I suspect that the standard Pocket 4 would still be quite capable of playing all of the games that the Pro can, albeit maybe not upscaled to the same degree. Taking a closer look at the specs of the Pocket 4 Pro though, we've got a Dimensity 1100 CPU, Mali G77 GPU, 8GB of RAM and 128GB of internal storage. It runs using Android 13 as its operating system, has a 5000 mAh battery, Bluetooth 5.2 and Wi-Fi 6, and as an added bonus it also has Hall effect analog sticks. The display here is 4.7 inches in size and features a resolution of 1334 by 750. I was initially a bit thrown off by this oddly specific resolution, but it's actually quite common for mobile devices. In fact, the iPhone 8, 7 and 6 all share this same resolution. Effectively though, if we round it down to the nearest common resolution for gaming, it's basically a 1280 by 720 display. Personally, I don't actually think that you need to have a resolution bigger than this for a handheld device of this size, especially when it's focused on retro game emulation. So I think the decision to not go for a 1080p screen is perfectly fine. What I will say though is that probably the closest competition to the Pocket 4 Pro is the Anbernic RG556, and the display on that device is bigger at 5.48 inches. It has a full 1080p resolution, and it's even an OLED display too. Plus, the RG556 is actually a little bit cheaper, coming in at $184.99. However, the Pocket 4 Pro is slightly better in terms of performance, so it's actually extremely difficult to say which of these two devices is the better one overall. Taking a look at the outside of the device, we've got something that actually looks really sleek. I love how it's quite minimal, and this timeless matte black finish looks awesome. The D-pad here feels really nice, having a soft click into it as you press in each of the directions, which gives you a nice bit of feedback. The analog sticks feel incredibly smooth, and because they're set back into the shell slightly, they sort of lock into place when you fully tilt them, and it makes it easy to slide them around. Now, I know this might not be a popular opinion, but with the focus of this device being on playing more demanding games on systems like the PS2 and GameCube, I kinda wish that the left analog stick was placed in the top left of the device instead of the D-pad. It just feels like your grip isn't in the optimal position when you're using the stick, whereas when you're using the D-pad, it feels perfect. Devices with a focus on 5th generation games or below should always have the D-pad in the top left. But devices like this that have more power and the potential for playing 6th generation games and beyond should really have the analog stick in this primary top left position in my opinion. But whether you agree with me on this or not probably depends on the sorts of games that you're going to be playing on this. The action buttons though are perfect, having great travel to them and feeling really high quality. You've also got the Android function buttons and the start and select buttons which are placed under the two analog sticks, and I can't complain about these either. Looking at the bottom of the device, we've got a micro SD card port to expand the storage, a headphone jack, and a USB port used for charging. On the top, we've got a micro HDMI output, volume control, and the power button, which also acts as a sleep button too. The shoulder buttons here are great too, giving you loads of room to rest your fingers on them and press them with ease. And the triggers here are analog and don't go too far back when you fully press them, which is an issue I've encountered with devices like this before. The back of the device is mostly just flat, but it does have these protruding bits to make room for the analog triggers, which also happen to provide a slight bit of extra support with your fingers naturally resting below them when you hold it. I've got to be honest, there's practically nothing to complain about here outside of my little problem with the analog stick placement, but like I say, I feel like that's quite a subjective thing, and some people will like that the D-pad takes the primary position. Overall, I dig it quite a lot. Now though, let's move on and talk about the dreaded Android setting up process. The main issue I always encounter in the setting up process with these Android devices is that nothing is ever configured to the optimal settings by default when you initially get the device. Retroid are actually seemingly trying in this area, and the built-in Retroid launcher is easily the best pre-installed front end I've ever come across. However, it's not that easy to change the settings of each of the emulators it comes provided with, and it's not entirely clear if all of this emulation software is the most up-to-date versions either. I also encountered an issue where I configured all of my emulators manually, re-linked them to the Retroid launcher, but then they were automatically reconfigured to what the Retroid launcher thinks is the best settings for the device. Basically undoing all of my customization, which needless to say was pretty irritating. Just like with every single one of these Android devices I've ever used, I always just end up never using a front end at all and just going into the main Android interface, downloading and customizing all of the individual emulators I actually want, and then sticking to that. I just find it far less clunky that way, and you're able to stay fully in control of everything. But now for the part you've all been waiting for. We've got everything set up and we've gone through the specs and ergonomics, so now let's move on to some game testing to see how things run. I'm not going to bore you too much with the pre-5th gen systems. They all run perfectly and you can add shaders or enhancements to your heart's content and games will look and run great. Atari 2600, Sega Mega Drive, NES, SNES, and any similarly powered systems are going to be awesome. Moving up to the PS1 and we can get absolutely perfect performance even with a 3x upscale. We could even go beyond that while still maintaining amazing frame rates, but there's no point considering that the screen is basically 720p, which equates to a 3x upscale with PS1 games. It's a very similar situation with N64, running games upscaled to a 960 by 720 resolution with perfect performance. If you're looking for a device to emulate these systems specifically, then this could be the one for you. I would probably say though that there's a lot of other systems that can run these consoles amazingly too, and they come at a much cheaper price point. The reason you want to buy a device like this is if you're interested in playing 6th gen games and beyond, which we're going to take a look at now. So moving up to the Dreamcast, and we once again can go up to a 1280 by 960 resolution and maintain rock solid frame rates even on demanding games. PS2 is where things get really interesting though, just because this system is a little bit more demanding. Even games like Ratchet & Clank and Metal Gear Solid 3 were running at a 2x upscale with insane performance. Even when I got to parts that normally stutter slightly in Ratchet & Clank on other devices, it was as smooth as butter. After that impressive showcase though, GameCube actually ended up disappointing me slightly. Most games ran perfectly at a 2x upscale, but the extremely high-end demanding games that pushed the GameCube to its max will rarely start chugging. It's only very few select titles like F-Zero GX, so for the most part you probably won't ever notice this. But it is a shame that it can't quite handle this, even with its impressive specs. I don't want to be too negative though, because probably 95% of the GameCube's library will work perfectly. Super Mario Sunshine, Super Monkey Ball and Mario Kart Double Dash all performed great in my testing. Even Wii games play great here too, with Mario Kart Wii running at a full 60 frames a second, even at a 2x upscale, and this looked particularly good due to it having widescreen support, which takes full advantage of the 16:9 screen. Speaking of which, PSP games also run amazingly and fill up the whole screen. Even super demanding games for this system like God of War Chains of Olympus ran flawlessly even at a 3x upscale, which is pretty impressive because most devices similar to this can't actually do this and need to drop down to a 2x upscale. From my experience, 3DS emulation on devices like this is normally a bit hit and miss. However, by using Citra MMJ, every single game I threw at it ran flawlessly. Now, is this the best device to play 3DS games on? No. Don't get me wrong, it's serviceable, but the screen is just a bit too small to have two displays on it in a way which looks good and retains the functionality of the original console. For any games that mostly use a single screen though, this is pretty good. Something that really caught me off guard is that the gyro controls just worked. I didn't even set them up or anything. I just launched Ocarina of Time 3D and I was wobbling the camera around like a madman. So, overall, I would say we've got a super solid handheld here. In fact, it's probably become my favourite device in this middle tier range. I'm giving the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro 9 dodos out of 10. It's powerful enough to play practically anything you're realistically gonna want to emulate on a device like this, with the only minor hiccup I encountered being those demanding GameCube titles. But there's so few of those that this isn't really an issue. This is easily the best performance I've ever seen on a device in this price range, and it really can't get much better than this. I absolutely love the minimal and sleek look of the device too, and even though the screen is only approximately 720p, it looks fantastic, and I don't think it needs to be a higher resolution than this. You could argue that it's not as comfortable to hold as the Anbernic RG556, and you definitely have a valid point. However, the RG556 is a lot bigger as a result of its superior ergonomics, which makes it less pocketable and travel friendly, whereas the Pocket 4 Pro takes up much less space. So which device you prefer here is down to your preferences. I guess it's a case of portability versus straight up comfort, but at the same time that isn't to say that the Pocket 4 isn't comfortable, just that it's not quite as nice to hold as the RG556. From my experience, the Pocket 4 Pro is also much easier to set up than the RG556, still having the standard Android setting up process, but not having any of the additional tweaking with settings that was required with the RG556, like adjusting the screen temperature and other minor things like that. Between the Anbernic RG556 and the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, I really don't see how this type of device can get much better outside of just being made cheaper somehow. There's not really much that they can do better at this point, and it'll be interesting to see where the emulation scene goes from here. We've already hit pretty amazing PS2 and GameCube performance on devices costing less than $200, so what actually is the next step here? Maybe going up to PS3 emulation on Android? Or simply lowering the cost of what we currently have? Or maybe just improving the screens and hardware even more so that we can upscale these older systems to an even better degree? I guess only time will tell. But those are my thoughts on the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro. Let me know if you've already picked one of these up, and if you're as impressed by it as I am. Also let me know where you think these Android devices are heading in the future. Do you think that we've finally hit the limit of how far they can be taken, or do you think there's somewhere else that they can improve? Also, remember to check out a Handheld History 88 to 95, links to that will be in the description below, and consider supporting us on Patreon too, where you can get access to some Dodo goodies. Also, while you're there, remember to give the video a like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe for more retro videos coming to your screens very soon. For now though, I've been Rob from Retro Dodo, and I'll see you in the next one.